Hey, what's going on? SBHS Multimedia. This is Mr. Campbell with another episode of how to make your catch and avoid game. So, you should have some stuff kind of like this, and we should be bouncing through those screens. The one thing it's missing, well, it's a guy shooting, it moves around, all that stuff works. The one thing that's kind of messed up, based on my previous episode, is that when you go through your startup frames, it only goes to the directions frame. What it should do is actually should show the first level. So if we look at our library, where's our library? Here's our library. So the library should show, let me just hide the actions for a second. The library of the splash screen, we worked really hard on this, didn't we? We should have all the way through level 1. So level 1, like this, and you should have 10 levels in here. So we should have 10 levels marching through this, and I don't have that on mine yet, but you should have 10. And what's not showing is that level screen. So we should have one of these for every level, and it's not showing it. So let's just open up our actions again. If you go to the startup layer, where all your startup actions are, it's one simple thing you got to do. In your next splash screen, what this does is it says, okay, when they click this button, the mouse event, when they click the next splash button, the go button, and it says next splash will go through the frames until frame 4. Now frame 4, which is greater than 3 as it says here, isn't actually our last one before we hit, because we should have 3 frames, and the third frame, which is not greater than 3, is the directions. So let's just change this to 4, and now you're going to have, there it is. So now it works. So that should make the thing go and play. Now you'll notice that also, let's get to that frame. Somehow my game's already playing, so something else is happening here that's starting the level. So the starting level makes playing to be true, so if that happens. Anyways, we'll figure that out later. And what we want to do today is we want to get enemies in our screen. Now, the enemy idea is based on the fact that we have one enemy for every level that we've got. So we should have at least 5 by now. And it's going to randomly pick which one to use based on some math.random operations. So to do this, we're going to go to scene 1. Inside scene 1, we're going to add a new layer. So here's the new layer button, and I'm going to drag that layer down all the way to the bottom, because these go from top to bottom is how it reads the code. So I'm going to open up this one, and I'm going to change the name of it to enemies. Okay, so enemies is now going to have, oh, you know what you should also do is make sure you save as, I think we're on version 3 now, so save as, and change your file name to version 3. So version 3 is enemies. Maybe it's 4, I'm not sure. So here's this. So enemies is going to be F9, open this up, and all it's going to do is figure out how often to make new enemies. So we're going to make some comments in here. They want to appear randomly at random spots. Alright, and so what's going to happen is we need to have a couple of variables. We need var enemy interval, and I'm just going to say that that's going to be equal to 0.02. I don't know if that's the right number or not. 0.02, there we go. We need variable enemy fleet, and that's the F is capital. That is our array. And the array it's just like our shots array. This one contains all the fleets, so we can move them each individually and knows them all by name. So this is going to equal new array. And let's see, we need enemy speed. And if I forget anything, we'll just come back and add it. And that's why I put all my variables at the top, is that way I can kind of work these out one at a time. So I'm going to give it 10 speed. We can change that later. And the reason we want to use an array for a variable for the speed is we want to make sure that we're able to change it using code, because if we advance the speed of the enemies every level of the game, then that's adding some variety to the game. So we're also going to have enemy shot speed. just going to have that equal to 15, so it's a little bit faster than the enemies themselves. Could be more, I don't know. So that's all our variables for now. And now we're going to have, let's make them up here. So we're going to say this is going to be add event listener. Now, a lot of our event listeners have to have something they're attached to. In this case, we do not have to have that. So add event listener is going to be an event enter frame, comma, new enemy. In our function, new enemy, oops, that should be one word, shouldn't it? Make sure you have camel case there, not Campbell case, that's very funny. No, camel case. So E event void, there we go. And so it started to do autocorrect for me, it wasn't for a minute there. And I'm just going to back this up. What I wanted to do here is just make some extra lines so I can center that or have it at the very top. Alright, so what this function is going to do is going to say if math.random is less, so it's a function, is less than enemy interval int, then do the stuff in the brackets to follow. So this, okay, so do the stuff here. So we're going to say var enemy, and enemy is going to give you a copy of enemy, which is in the library. Make sure this name the same. Whatever it says here is what it should be here, and it's best if this is based on that name but is lowercase. So that's our tradition when we do instance variables. So new enemy and semicolon. Now it's going to draw one into the screen. We're going to give it a location. We're going to add it to the screen. So add child with a capital C. Add child enemy lowercase. That's the instance variable. And we need to give it a location. We need to add to the array. So now we're going to say enemy fleet, which is the array that we made earlier. Dot push means add to it this thing called enemy. So once it joins the enemy fleet, it sort of gets its own identity as being a number of that fleet. But we still do need to locate it. Enemy.x. And here we're going to use math random again. Again, math random gives us a number between 0 and 1. So it's kind of like a percentage. So if we say this is equal to math.random times stage.stage width, it's going to give us an place in there. Now, it may be that we have a variable in there based on the width of my screen, because I do have a thing in there that is, yeah, I don't have that. Let's see, startup player movement. My player movement has a, well, okay, I have some boundaries, so let's see if I made those. Left bound, no, where did I put those? So I think I put some variables in here, and the reason I did that is because in my game I've got the scoreboard on the left and the right, on the left side, excuse me, on the right side. And so that means I don't want to use the full screen. So I'm going to use right boundary, I think. Let's see. Yes, right boundary. So that's the x value. It's the value of the distance. So instead of this, I'm going to use paste. You may be using stage width. I used r bound here. The only reason I used r bound is because in my game, oops, I'm going to put a note here that says or use SSW, because my R bound is a special variable I used to indicate how far to the right the player should go. So we're going to say enemy.y is going to equal, I'm just going to put 10 for now as a starter, later change to 0. And the reason I want to change it to 0 is because it really should launch out of the top of the screen, or bottom of scoreboard, depending. Okay, so you may need to decide where that's actually show up. But let's try it and see what happens. So now I've got play, and they're already actually showing up. Now you can see them showing up here and playing through the frames they have. And immediately I've got a problem with that, because they shouldn't just be showing up. Notice when I've got my start screen happening, there they are. Oh, you can't see them. There they are. I need them showing up only if the game is being played. So we need to add an if here. So I'm going to go to the top here, add a new line, and we're going to say if playing is true. So I can just say that. So playing is true. So if it was false, we'd have to add more of a statement there, but that works fine. So out of this button here will format the code. Now when you add a left, always add a right to match. I've got 1, 2, 3 lefts and 1, 2, 3 rights. One of the biggest mistakes I deal with students is they wind up adding left brackets and they wind up having a right bracket that's sort of orphaned out there somewhere. So let's now take and see if that worked. So no enemies. If I click, and we start playing, now we have enemies showing up. And notice this is scrolling through all of its types. If we bring that in lower, you'll see that's gonna, let's bring it at 50. You'll see it scrolling through all of the things. Now the reason it's doing that is because it's got a bunch of frames. We need to make it stop playing all those frames. Cut that out, yo. So end, there we go. So now we're gonna say enemy, oops, enemy dot, go to and stop frame 1. Oh, now we're gonna do frame 1 for now just to prove ourselves that it works. But, so now it's gonna show up and it's showing up randomly. There we go. So what we should do though is at some point we need to have this statement be some number based on the level. So if I add a new line here, we're going to have enemy frame as a new variable. Var enemy frame is going to equal level times math.random. Now here's the problem with that. That result of that, if I trace this, enemy frame, we're going to get back some crazy number. And by crazy, I mean it's not a rounded off integer. So we want an integer coming back from this. So there's our output. And all these numbers are not really working. We need to get, not only do we need it to be an integer, but we need it to be 1 or greater because it's going to choose which frame of the enemy to play. So let me move this out of the way for a second. So enemy, we want to get back numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, depending on what level we're on. So in level 1, when we're playing, we're having, we should have 1. And if we're playing level 2, we should get 1 or 2. So there's another thing we're going to add to this. We're going to say math, big case, math dot ceiling, C-E-I-L, and then we have to add another in parentheses. So now I've got 2 lefts, and I need to do 1, 2, 3 lefts. 1, 2, 3 lefts, 1, 2. Nope, they put one there already for me. So when I did that, it put one in place for me. So now I've got 1, 2 lefts, 1, 2 rights. So now if we trace enemy frame again, you'll find it's going to work for us, giving us 1 and only 1. So what the ceiling did is it says, let's go to the next number up. Now let's test this. And we haven't really completed that piece yet because we need to have that choose which frame of the enemy to play. But if we go back to startup, I think we're looking for the variable. Okay, variables. So the startup variables. Let's start at level 5, and we're going to put that back in a minute. So now it's going to give us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over here in the output panel, and it should give us a 1 once in a while. There it is. It's giving us all those values. So test that first. That's why we use the trace thing. Okay, that's why trace is important. So now let's bring this back to 1 because we know it works, or 0. Level 0 is our starting level, because what happens is, I think, in the startup, when this starts up the game, let's see, game start level, does it increase level? Yeah, level increases by 1. So always have your starting value for levels at 0. So let's go back to enemies, and let's just, okay, we did the enemy frame thing. Instead of saying go to and stop 1, we're going to say go to and stop enemy frame. Copy, paste, and let's cancel or comment that out. So now it's going to work with different enemies. Okay, so now we have a thing in place that takes the enemies, puts them in place, positions them randomly. Now you could work on the timing if you want them to show more or less. The opening level of the game should be easy, so you don't want them showing up too often. So if I just say 015, okay, that's going to be a little bit less, and you can increase it by 0.01 or 0.001 per level if you want to. So you know, smaller numbers is going to be less frequent. Okay, now we still have to move the enemies. They don't move yet, and later we're going to add shooting. We're not in this version. So new enemy is going to show up, and now we have to move that new enemy. So to move the new enemy, we're going to use another inner frame thing. So we're going to say add event listener. Oops. Listener. Event.enter frame. And we're going to have a thing called move enemies. Or move enemy. Whatever it is, make sure they match. And I'm going to give some more lines so this moves up. Okay. So my function called move enemy, and you can always just copy this and paste it so that they match. Alright, and this is an E event void. Void just means we're not doing any output from this function. And now we're going to say, well, what's going to happen? We're going to have to go through that array. So just like you do with shooting for the player shots, we're going to say for var I, it's right next to the O, I made a mistake there, integer, oops, need to be a full-on colon, dot dot, is an integer, and it's equal to enemy fleet, dot length, -1. And again, the reason we're doing -1 is because the index starting at 0. So the biggest index number in there is always going to be one less than number in there, which is enemy fleet.length. So we're going to use all values of I greater than or equal to 0. And we're going to say I minus minus. So go down. And what this does is it allows us to do one thing at a time, one number at a time. So when we have the enemy fleet, we're going to go through them one, it's called a serial number, if you will. So one soldier at a time on these to move them. And so now we're going to say for each one of these, we're going to say enemy fleet, oops, I. Now that's something I'm going to be using a whole bunch. So because I'm lazy, I'm going to copy this. So Control C. So I've got a copy of it. So we're going to take that object and its Y value and increase by, so plus equals, with no spaces in it, enemy speed. Now let's double check that we actually have a variable called enemy speed. Enemy speed, there it is, it's 10. Alright, so as the enemies roll through, let's see if they even move now. And there they go. They move. Now the only issue there is that they're not being disposed of, so we need to next dispose of them as they leave the screen. That's just a little comment here. So now we're going to say if enemy fleet I, and I copied and pasted that, dot y is greater than stage height. You may need to change it to a different value. If your scoreboard is at the bottom, you may want to do some math like SSH minus scoreboard dot height or scorebg dot height or something like that. In mine, I go all the way to the bottom, so you may want to figure that out. What should it be? So stage height, if that happens, then we're going to remove it from the screen. So remove child. This is out of sight. And I use out of sight, out of mind to remember there's two things to do there. Remove child, enemy fleet I. Again, I copied and pasted that. And then we're going to say enemy fleet, but not the I. Dot splice. And splice means take one out and close the gap. I, comma, 1. So now when they leave the screen, before we do that, let's change that value that they have to leave the screen at. Let's say stage height minus like 50. So we want to see it leave the screen first. 50. Alright. So we're going to see the enemies show up on the screen. No, truly we are. I think they're flying, they're not flying. Apparently I'm not getting enemies, I don't know. So move enemies. They moved before I added this code in here, so 50. Let's say, change that to 10. Let's see if my number was too big. I'm not sure what happened there. So it's moving down the screen. There we go. So it's moving, and it's going to disappear when it hits the bottom of the screen. So let's change that value a bit more, just to make sure that we can ascertain that it is in fact disappearing. Then we'll change it back to whatever the value at the bottom of the screen is. There we go. So it's showing up, it's going to disappear right there. So we know that it works. Now we can set that 50 out. So whatever the bottom of the screen is here. So let's just put a comment here. And that's a block comment, which is /**//. So now I've got a comment in there that says whatever that should be. That's it for moving the enemies. In our next version, we're going to do enemy shooting, which is a total lots of fun. We've seen it before, but it adds to it some complexity because we have to decide when each individual enemy should be firing their missiles. Alright, see you soon. Peace.